It's short. I've already kind of said it a bit, but I think the one thing I could really say about making is celebrating being human. I think a model can be a ton of different things, obviously.
It's something that represents something else.
A representation, whether it be like literal or metaphorical.
Something you base something off of that you could maybe use as inspiration. It's usually a human model, but I think it could also be just like a starting place too.
It's a three-dimensional sketch, but it's not a finished thing. Like I don't really, like you look at the models that big firms will make, or like they'll send off to other places to have made, and it's like they're trying to get as close as possible to the actual thing, and it's like that's not really what I think of when I think of a model. It's more of the unfinished idea where you could snap off a part of it and then, you know, completely redo it. It's not something that's set in stone.
And then we also make digital models, which those are a little more time consuming to me than physical models.
I think we have seen, even in the time I've been here, a massive shift towards digital. I've had studios where I have been on the computer, on the screen the entire time. We know arguments about how screens affect people. I think something that I've realized in terms of history is we always look at technology, especially this digital technology, computers, industry, electronics, as a progression, an extension of progression of humanity and human genius. I think we discount the other things that can be learned and processes that can be gained outside of digital.
You can see that the models became conceptual, and I realized early on that the model had its own autonomy and it was connected to the work. And so it had its own aura. And for a young architect, it actually propelled me to become known as an architect through my ideas.
The culture around it was, we have 3D printers, we allegedly have this shop that everyone's welcome to come into.
The model is king. The model will get you the job.
I don't think people don't want to make models. I think it's always an issue of everyone trying to fight for the limited machines that we have.
I think in school, a lot of models have been usually made to represent an idea that's already been fully formed.
It really tells you if your product is intuitive or not, and it's really humbling, and it's like, oh, these people are really like stepping into my brain.
And I think a lot of times what you see in the kind of traditional architecture model is this physical making that's a way to allow the average passerby to engage and understand the spatial conditions.
That was how I learned. It wasn't, you know, as much as I love the software part of it, it was never about, you know, translating that in a digital space. It was always, you know, you do something, it might breed accidents or it might turn out exactly how you wanted to, but you would always have those moments where you're like, I really like that thing that's happening. And, you know, that's how you learned how to articulate different spatial moments and things that were happening, was because you were making it physically and you could actually see how the environment would interact with it.
The studios where I felt the most growth in myself and in my education have always involved making and exploring together, not the model as an afterthought of what we have already created on our digital realm, but modeling woven through learning.
Every single day we were making models, and some of them were like, you know, well thought out designs, but some of them were just trying to figure out what a brick does, or like how you can work with a piece of wood. Like, does it want to exist in a plane or stick, or, you know. So I think that studio was like the breakthrough for me as far as like understanding a design process and it actually getting me somewhere. Like, my team's design was the one that the school picked, and So, I mean, had COVID not happened, we would have got to build it, and then that final step would have been complete. But we still got that experience, and it like got to see it standing. So,
Architects aren't risk takers. They provide a certain task conventionally. The risk taking in architecture would be more if you're interested in the art of architecture and your whole profession is riskier.
the scale that we're building on is so big. We only do schools, whether it be higher ed or K through 12. A lot of it has to do is with would the client appreciate or be able to understand the project better if there was a model? I don't know. I kind of think so. But at what point is it like, okay, this is a giant, complex, scaled down, you lose a lot of detail. And I think it needs to be thought about differently at that scale. I think like a small detail, or even just like maybe there's like a beautiful staircase, for example, in the building. I think there's ways that we can think about model making in an office setting that isn't just the whole thing laid out in front of a client.
I'm not proposing this, but I can see this in the real world taking place. The one that can be left out of the equation is the architect. And the technical person can already be picked up by the building group. You might argue that we already don't produce highly skilled people technically. And if you were the builder, you wouldn't bring somebody from architecture anyway. You'd bring someone in from the building industry that's just learned through experience. Academic thing is not helpful to them.
I think when you slow down to make something and you slow down to interact with it, it gives you time to think. In a world where we're constantly scrolling, constantly going to the next job, constantly going to the next assignment, how are you supposed to be creative unless you make space to think about things?
In today's world, there's not a sense of play. Yes. It's how can I turn this out as quick as possible without putting my touch on it, my design, my aspect, but it needs to be, how can I play with this? How can I experiment? Because that's part of creation.
And I think like modeling out a key component of a very large building could give you the ability to say like, this is like the star show of the building, like this is where you bring people in and it's a really cool experience. And then the owner can start to imagine that when they see it in their hands. Like,
I would think it'd be useful to expand it to a broader set of issues. And it's a prototype of something that represents the most basic notion of what it means to be an architect that produces buildings for an owner other than oneself. It's not at all simply about design. It's about the thing you presented, which is the total process of constructing the nature of our physical environment.